Okay, in this particular lesson, we are going to talk about some basic ecological principles, the keywords that we're going to be talking about in ecology and using on a consistent basis. I think for a lot of you, this is going to be refreshing and repeating what you learned in middle school life science. So the first thing that we're really going to focus on is we're going to talk about our specific factors, being biotic and abiotic, and exactly what ecology is. All right. In the last few lessons, we talked about splitting down a word using the root, prefix, suffix, and we talked about ology, and ology being a study of something. In this case, it's study of eco, and eco is really talking about ecosystem. And the ecosystem, what we're really referring to is the environment. So ecology is going to be a study of environment. Specifically, it's talking about interactions between the organisms and that environment. And there are two big features, or two big factors that come into ecology. Biotic, and bio we know should be living, and abiotic. And the trick there is that putting the prefix a implies not biotic, so non-living. So we have living and non-living factors in the environment. So, for example, some of those factors, right, we could really focus on the abiotic factors being like wind, the air, water, perhaps sunlight, versus biotic factors really talking about the organisms in that environment. So like I said, examples, air, water. You can also think of temperature, right? Or water temperature specifically, pH of water. You can get really descriptive when you talk about the abiotic factors. Biotic factors, right, we're going to be talking about animals, plants, bacteria, fungus, etc. All of those living factors. So here, we can talk about abiotic versus biotic factors. Abiotic factors, we have, I guess you could consider that blue sky being like the air, right? Perhaps sunlight is coming through. We have some water down here as an abiotic factor. And other than that, we really don't seem to have many abiotic factors. We also start to classify organisms or group organisms in ecology. And we can group them based on their energy source, where their energy comes from. We say what they eat, but we use that phrase kind of like loosely because the trick is that an autotroph, auto meaning self, troph referring to energy, so an autotroph is self-energizing. This is any organism that's able to actually make its own energy by making its own food. So the way that they do this, photosynthesis is a perfect example of autotrophic nutrition, using the sunlight in order to make their food. So that is, plants are autotrophs. Chemosynthesis, chemo implying chemical, right? Chemosynthesis is really about using chemicals. So instead of photosynthesis being light as what's used, chemosynthesis is using chemicals to make that food to generate the energy. Chemosynthetic organisms are pretty much reserved for bacteria, and specifically a particular group of bacteria, we refer to them as archaebacteria, and they tend to live in pretty extreme environments where there really isn't another way for them to make their food. So they use the harsh chemicals in that environment. So our autotrophs, right, are going to make their own food. So here's an example of photosynthetic autotrophs versus these right here are actually tube worms. Tube worms at the hydrothermal vents under the ocean, right, where there's burning hot gases spewing out of these hydrothermal vents from the core of the Earth. And we have bacteria that live in these tube worms that are able to actually feed off of those chemicals and kind of start the food chain in that particular environment. We can also group heterotrophs. A heterotroph is going to be hetero, just like we use the word heterosexual, meaning that your interest is in the opposite sex, all right? Hetero meaning different, right? So this is, you get your energy for something different. You're not getting it from yourself by making it yourself. You're obtaining it from a different source, all right? So they're basically going to be organisms that eat. Herbivores, carnivores, and omnivores, those should all be pretty familiar to you. So we have herbivores being our plant eaters. We have deer, manatees. Quite frequently, manatees, fish, this is a blue tang. We don't always think about the fact that algae, all right, organisms that eat algae is herbivore. Carnivores. Sometimes we forget that organisms like frogs and spiders that feed off of insects are actually carnivorous. That insect is actually meat. Omnivores. Those organisms that will consume both plant and animal, both meat and non-meat. Then we have detrivores, right? Detrivores is kind of our fancy word. I'm guessing that your middle school word that you used was scavengers, right? These are organisms that are going to eat dead plant or animal matter, right? They're going to be the ones that eat something that's already dead. Versus a decomposer. The key here is to recognize that a decomposer is not really eating, right? It's breaking down, right? So it's breaking down that decaying matter and absorbing energy in the process. So our decomposers aren't really, scavenging and finding something dead and eating something dead. They're really helping the process of different matter that's decaying and being returned back to the earth to kind of recycle it. That wraps it up for our basic information on ecology, and we will be continuing to build on this throughout the unit.